Does your wrestling suck?
What is that? What is that? What is that?
Do you want to stop pulling guard like a coward and start smashing men?
What?
Well, who better to learn from than the king of smashing himself? I booked a one-way ticket to Dagestan with the ultimate goal of learning from the legendary undefeated champion Khabib Nurmagomedov. But then I realized, why fly all the way to Dagestan when I had everything I needed right in front of me? $197 for barely an hour of footage? This seemed ridiculous. But then I thought to myself, think about all the coward guard pullers you could help by buying this instructional. You could change the world. I knew what I had to do. I'm gonna smash it. Hi everyone, Khabib Thinny Nurm Tano here, the internet's busiest MMA nerd. And it's time for a review of this Khabib instructional, Sambo, the top game, a blueprint for smashing. This is the first ever instructional from legendary MMA star Khabib Nurmagomedov, in which he teaches some of his favorite techniques, along with some valuable tips and insight into how Khabib thinks about fighting. Something to tackle right away would be the language issue. Now obviously English is not Khabib's first language, so there are times throughout the instructional when you can tell he can't really find the right words to use, but I don't think this affects the quality of the instructional at all. It isn't an incredibly in-depth, piece-by-piece verbal breakdown of techniques like a John Danaher instructional is, but I don't think it has to be. Khabib does a good job of showing the technique on his cousin and Bellator champion Usman Nurmagomedov, while breaking it down verbally the best he can. The instructional begins with Khabib teaching how to close distance as a wrestler in MMA. He emphasizes putting punches before your takedowns, getting your opponent's hands occupied up top to make the shot easier. He then talks about proper positioning when attempting your takedowns. Fundamental ideas such as keeping your head up and on the inside to the chest, not bending over at the waist, keeping your hips as close to your opponent as possible. If you are someone more experienced in wrestling or grappling, these seem like obvious things, but they are still very valuable tips and great to hear. Especially for people like me who know that's what I should be doing, but still shoot takedowns like this. Bruh. He goes back to talking about mixing strikes in with takedowns, even breaking down the McGregor knockdown as an example. And from here, it begins to get a little bit scattered. He goes from reiterating more about positioning when shooting, to then briefly talking about top control, then back to closing the distance, and then to chaining takedowns, then over to cage wrestling. And this is all in a span of about 4 minutes. This kind of jumping around is something that you wouldn't see in a Danaher or a Gordon Ryan instructional. Those instructionals seem to have way more preparation. In this one, it kind of seems like Khabib just showed up with Usman and said, "What do you want me to teach?" And Bernardo Faria is kind of just naming things off in no particular order. After going through generally the same concepts in those various topics, Khabib starts going over specific techniques. He does a good job of showing a takedown from the over-under clinch. He doesn't rush through it, and he describes it quite well. He mentions that the S-grip is his favorite way to lock his hands. He doesn't give a reason why, he just kind of states that. He transitions into teaching a foot sweep from the over-under clinch, and then the Haraya Goshi from the wizard position, all while demonstrating the technique very well and giving sufficient commentary through his limited vocabulary. Didn't mean to rhyme. It without a doubt lacks some of the depth and detail that the premier instructionals offer, but like I said, sufficient. Then nearing the end of volume 1, he goes over defending the single leg. I find this section to be the most informative and well taught out of all of them. He goes through the immediate fundamental reactions in the position, such as getting the whizzer, making your opponent carry your weight, and bringing your leg to the outside. He mentions that if your opponent's head is down, not in proper position, it becomes really easy to just push down on the head and make the single leg pretty much useless. He then goes through the technique of stripping your opponent's grip on your leg, giving great advice to drill this technique over and over to master the feel of it. He also mentions once you go through all these defensive steps, it'll put you right back into position for the Haraya Goshi. Overall, this instructional does a good job of covering the essential basics when shooting a takedown, whilst giving good fundamental advice in other grappling positions. These aren't secrets by any means, and what Khabib is talking about could probably be figured out in about 3 YouTube videos. As I said earlier, it lacks the depth and detail of the premier instructionals, and is quite scattered and doesn't feel prepared at all. So for a price tag of $197, I'm feeling a strong 3 to a light 4 on this instructional transformation. Would you give this instructional payment? Do you love it? Do you hate it? What would you rate it? Okay, I'm done. There's no way I did a whole instructional breakdown in Fantano style. That's crazy. Okay, so I actually didn't buy the instructional. I torrented it legally, but don't tell Khabib. He will smash me. And looking back at the website now, it actually shows that there's 2 more volumes. So if you really want me to cover those last 2 volumes, I can. But I already recorded the video. It's all done. So if you made it to this part, thank you for watching. And